Move on to the next one. So very quick, fast-paced is, well, that's the intention at least. So I'm going to start with the first finalist, Natalie Samarasinghe. She's Executive Director of the United Nations Association in the UK. She's the first woman to hold this role, and she's, of course, speaking here in a personal capacity. And she's going to be talking about a truly global partnership, helping the UN to do itself out of a job.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here. The task set by the Global Challenges Foundation is basically my day job. I've been working on UN reform for over a decade now, and that's probably enough to make anyone depressed. But I keep going for two reasons. First, the risks we face, environmental, economic, political, social, require nothing short of a transformation in global governance. New tools and technologies can help us solve some issues, but we need to keep this big picture challenge in mind if we are to succeed. Second, I'm afraid we don't have the luxury of a blank sheet. Yes, the UN is flawed, but world leaders are not going to wake up tomorrow and just give us something better. It took 2 world wars to get to where we are today. So if we are serious about addressing global risks, we need to build on what we have, while also creating the conditions and incentives to move to something better. So my solution is based on an old saying: change what you can, embrace what you can't. Embrace doesn't mean accept, it means thinking differently about how we use the tools we have. The General Assembly and the Security Council, they will always be politicized, so let's use them for what they're good for: platforms for discussion and tools of last resort. Instead, let's turn to the wider UN system that works on preventing as well as managing risks. Then we can take 2 steps that will shake up global governance and make it more effective, more inclusive, and accountable. The first step is to open up the UN. Thousands of organizations already work with it, and often they are more important actors than states. When it comes to cyber governance, think of the role of tech companies. When it comes to community work on de-radicalization, youth groups are more important. But these organizations are excluded from formal decision-making. At best, this can mean a loss of skills and ideas. At worst, it can mean the creation of parallel structures that waste time and money and that have little accountability. So let's have businesses and NGOs sit alongside states at the UN. This type of partnership got us the landmine ban and the Paris Climate Agreement. Let's make it official, and we could achieve a lot more. This would give stakeholders a real say in shaping the policies that affect them. It would give the public more routes to influence the UN. And that's especially important for those of us who don't feel well represented by our governments. States, in turn, will get to share the burden of policymaking and financing. If the top 10 companies gave just 0.01% of their profits to the refugee agency, it would represent a bigger contribution, more than twice, of the whole EU. The second step is to open up the UN's to-do list. The UN spends most of its time on tasks that others can do. We know communities must take the lead on sensitive issues like family planning. We know that the really innovative solutions on big data and AI warfare are not going to come from states alone. So let's start the world's biggest capacity building drive and transfer tasks from the UN to businesses and NGOs. This would help them to coordinate, to access funding, and to scale up. In return, they would have to accept UN standards as well as scrutiny by experts and the public through tools such as inspections and apps to report problems. This would boost the UN's ability to focus on the things that it does best, that only it can do. At the moment, the UN Human Rights Office has less money than Americans spend on Halloween costumes for their pets. So let's free up the UN's resources so that it can be a global safety net and do more to help states reach the political agreements we need if we are to address conflict and issues such as disarmament and climate change. These transformations build on what we have, because change is easier when it feels like a journey. But what about that all-important first step? Well, as it happens, we've already taken it 100 years ago when we created the International Labour Organization, where states, business and workers sit side by side. And there have been many other models since then. We are now at a make or break moment, with UN bodies facing huge shortfalls and already looking outside the system. All it would take is one or two more to seize this opportunity and to initiate a dramatic transformation. These two deceptively simple steps, opening up the UN, opening up its to-do list, represent a huge, huge redistribution of power and resources. They would help us move organically from our flawed UN to a new form of global governance that provides an inclusive framework to develop and implement solutions like those we'll hear today. And then, the challenge of managing global risks will no longer be up to states or institutions alone, but something that is embedded in communities and organizations across the world in a truly global partnership. Tack. Thank you.
Tack. Tack. Beautiful Swedish at the end. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's hear if the jury has some questions. Julia?
Okay, good. Thank you, Natalie. Maybe I took the title of your proposal too literally, because you do say at the end, embrace what you can't. But your proposal suggests that you wanted that one day the UN would do itself out of a job or cease to exist, is the way I understood it. And so how realistic is this? Or at least how realistic is your goal to change things? And when do you see this happening?
I think we're now, it's a great question. We're now in this interesting transition where, power is flowing not just east and south, but also horizontally and vertically. And I think it's hard to tell now where we might be in 10 years in terms of how decisions are made and how societies are structured. This is a starting point, my proposal, 2 steps to change the habits we have, how we make decisions and how we implement them. And I think they could be a catalyst for that transition. It may end up with a UN that's just a safety net. It may end up with a totally new form of governance. But I think it's about the catalyst for the process that also addresses risks along the way.
Okay. Julia looks reasonably satisfied with that answer. Reshma, please.
Natalie, we're with the UN associations. How would you collaborate with similar associations in other countries and build a movement around, both your pillars, which is opening up the UN and opening up its to-do list?
So I think, we collaborate a lot with the 100 or so UN associations and other NGOs around the world. Opening up the UN has been something we've pushed for from the outset, and we heard, I think, Marlene speak about that very passionately this morning. I think what we've seen is that, more and more other partners can appreciate that impetus as well. So this would be really about creating a civil society movement that also works with business and everyone who would benefit and have a stake in opening up this process. And I include governments, in that as well. And finding, is there a coalition? Is there a particular agency that might like to try this out in full? I think if you have a successful model, if you can see it, that always helps. So I think this would be the starting process of building a civil society movement. I was very privileged at UNA UK to be part of something called the 1 for 7 billion movement. That was a coalition of 200 million people, 250 NGOs that changed how the UN selects its Secretary General. So I have seen, despite my depressing job, change is possible. And I think this would be a great opportunity to start that.
Is there anything else you would like the jury to know about your proposal, or you're satisfied?
I am satisfied indeed.
Okay.
I think the main thing is, just as I tried to say before, it is a starting point for a process. It is a catalyst. It's not perfect. I don't think anything we will hear is perfect today, but hopefully this is something that gives all of you a little bit of food for thought.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we're going to move on to the second finalist. So